Since 2001, Animal Crossing has crossed over with some of Nintendo's biggest franchises. From Mario items in the original Animal Crossing to brand new villagers in New Leaf, many of the most iconic Nintendo franchises have made some kind of appearance in the game. But with New Horizons, it seems like that's been a lot less of a priority. With the announcement that there are no more updates coming to the game, New Horizons is left with only a Sanrio crossover, some Mario items, most of which were already in other games, and some references to games and Gullivar's dialogue. But this got me thinking, what would it look like if every major Nintendo franchise crossed over with New Horizons? Today we're going to imagine what that would look like if Nintendo decided to do some more crossovers with their franchises. For this video, every series is going to get 2 pieces of clothing and 3 pieces of furniture. Some series are going to get some wallpapers, some are going to get some flooring, and a couple are going to get a new villager concept. Nintendo is pretty random whenever it comes to what items come in a crossover, so I don't think we really need to have too many set rules. As a side note, I'm defining major franchises as ones that the average person thinks of whenever they're thinking of Nintendo, so even though Luigi's Mansion sold really well, I don't think your grandma knows what that is, so it's not going on the list. Just as a disclaimer, I added these items so that we could see what they look like in New Horizons, but they are by no means perfect. This is more so just a way for us to get like a visual representation of what could be done if these items came. If I spent time polishing every single one of these items, this video would probably never come out. But with that being said, let's move into our first series. The first and most obvious franchise for a crossover is the Mario series. New Horizons already has Mario-themed items added to the game, but a lot of them are just remastered versions of things from all the way back in the original Animal Crossing, so there's a lot missing that could be in. For the purposes of this video, we're going to imagine that Nintendo's doing a crossover so that they can promote the latest game in a series, and in this case that's going to be Mario Odyssey. This makes our first piece of clothing pretty much a no-brainer. Cappy made his debut in Mario Odyssey, and he kind of acts as the game's unofficial mascot. It's pretty shocking that they didn't add Cappy in with the 35th anniversary crossover, since all they had to do was just put eyes on the already existing Mario hat, but that makes my job easier, so I'm fine with it. Our second piece of clothing is something that we're going to use to reference Mario in general. This red, white, and blue outfit is one that's seen across multiple games. It was first worn by Mario on the cover of NES Open Tournament Golf, and most recently it's been used in Smash Bros. As an alternate costume and an outfit in Odyssey. I feel like if we're choosing just a set amount of items to be brought over, things like this would be a good way to represent multiple games across the series. Moving on to wallpaper, I went with a rotating coin wall as a reference to those rooms in a bunch of different Mario games where the rooms are just completely filled with coins. The animation really just adds an extra layer of uniqueness to this that makes the wallpaper stand out as opposed to something that would just have coins in a pattern. In terms of furniture, I think a recreation of the Odyssey would be something pretty cool that I'm sure would fit onto some people's islands. Maybe it could even be a little bit interactive, like if you walk by or interact with it, then the ramp comes out or something like that. The only issue would be the size. If you shrink it down too much, it would look funny, and if you make it too big, then it would take up way too much space, but I'm sure Nintendo could find a way to work around that. This next piece of furniture is the City Tripper from Mario Kart 8. Of course, we needed to give some representation to the spin-off Mario games, and what better way to do that than with the best-selling Switch game? This works kind of in both ways because Animal Crossing crossed over with Mario Kart, and this is the kart that's used for that crossover. And for our last item of the Mario set, I think that it would be cool to have a Power Moon rug from Odyssey. I went with the 8-bit style moon because I think it's a good way to bridge the gap between new Mario and old Mario. Obviously there's so much more that could be done and has already been done with the Mario crossovers, but I think these would make pretty nice additions. Next up we have the Kirby franchise. It's pretty shocking that there haven't been any Kirby crossovers since the aesthetic of the series seems pretty in line with the Animal Crossing series, but I think there's some pretty good potential ideas that could be added. Starting off, this technically isn't considered furniture, but I think we should have an umbrella based off the parasol copy ability. This is one of the most iconic copy abilities, and it appears in a ton of Kirby games, so its inclusion seems like a pretty safe option. Plus, it looks pretty normal, so it could be used outside of the actual Kirby reference. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we have the Kirby net. I'll admit, this one is a little bit of cheating because I already made this for another video, but I think the idea is so out there that it would be just a super interesting item to include. This would also work as a nod to Kirby in the Forgotten Land because in that game, Kirby possesses normal everyday items like cones or cars, so a net wouldn't be too out there. And since we probably need some kind of houseware item, I think it would be cool to have a star-themed couch to go along with the star motif that's present in a lot of Kirby games. The pink and blue coloring is used a lot in official Kirby merchandise, and I think it would fit really nicely with the other like pastel and cute items in the game. Obviously, this one is a lot more subtle than the other items, but I feel like that would probably be a good thing. Moving into clothing, I originally wanted to do a blue bandana as a reference to the bandana Waddle Dee, but I realized that nobody would know what that meant, so instead I just went with a standard Kirby bandana. I kept the color as blue so that it could be a very loose way to represent a character that a lot of people really want to see represented. Our other clothing item is going to be a Meta Knight mask. Majora's Mask exists in New Leaf, so it's not too out of the question to bring in another iconic mask. If they wanted to go above and beyond, they could do things like make the eyes glow, or they could even add his wings in addition to the mask. And finally, our villager representation will be from a cat villager based on the Wolfie enemy from Kirby and the Forgotten Land. These enemies are brand new to the series as the Forgotten Land, and they're pretty prominent throughout the game. They pretty much replace the Waddle Dees. If we wanted to do a villager that was a little bit more unique and still represents Forgotten Land, we could instead go with a mouse based on Elflin, but I think this one's a little less readable than the Wolfie villager. Either way, I think both of these would make really cool villagers for somebody's island. The Wii series is the third highest selling Nintendo series. It even passed up Legend of Zelda and Animal Crossing, so a crossover could make sense. Of course, these crossovers are used mainly as a point of promotion for new games coming out, and I get the feeling there probably won't be any new Wii games anytime soon, so this is the most what-if type of scenario. For clothing, of course we have to bring back the Mii mask from New Leaf. The fact that the Mii mask was excluded from New Horizons isn't really that shocking given the fact that Nintendo's been moving away from Miis lately, but the novelty of using the Mii mask is something that just is really hard to replicate. And since the Switch does have a Mii Maker built in, I don't think it would be too out of the question. We don't really have any items that do anything similar to this, and it would be nice to add on just to have a little bit more customization for our characters. I chose the shirts that the Miis wear in Wii Sports Resort as our other clothing piece because that's just what I think of when I think of the Wii series, and especially bowling. There could be multiple color variations as well since there are different colors in Resort, but if we had to stick to one, I think blue is probably the most recognizable. Speaking of bowling, our first furniture item could be a special bowling ball that you get after you reach the pro status in Wii Sports. I feel like everyone has memories of grinding and bowling to reach pro status in Wii Sports, so I think this would be a really good way to represent those hours spent pausing and quitting bad games so that you don't lose experience points. Next up we have a small model of the Whale Shark, which is a blimp that you see mostly in the Island Flyover minigame in Wii Sports Resort, but it's also appeared in other games like Pilotwings Resort and Mario Kart 7. If we wanted to make it a little bit more unique, maybe we could make it customizable to have villagers' faces on the side, similar to how Mii's faces could sometimes show up on the side of the blimp during Island Flyover. Our final piece of furniture is one that I think would be the most likely to make its way into a future Animal Crossing game, and that's the Wii Fit balance board. There's already consoles like the Switch in the game, and there's even accessories like the Ring-Con, so I don't think Nintendo's opposed to adding real-life items like these into the game. The balance board is not only iconic as a piece of hardware, but also as the main host of Wii Fit, so I'd love to have this item as part of like a gaming room setup in Animal Crossing. The Wii series would be a pretty wild crossover for Animal Crossing to do, but as a way to bring back nostalgia, I think these items would really do the trick. Our next franchise is one that pretty much everyone has expected to cross over, and that's Pokemon. So far, the only crossover these two series have had is an Eevee event and Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, so I think people are ready for Pokemon items in a mainline game. Starting off, I went with this wood flooring that looks like it's discolored in a way to make a Pokeball. This would probably get covered up once items start getting placed in the house, but I think a large Pokeball in the center of the floor makes the most sense for a flooring. For clothing, I once again wanted to do something that general fans of the game would like, so I went with this t-shirt that follows the Pokeball color motif. Obviously this design is pretty basic, but I think if Nintendo were to do an official crossover with Pokemon, this would probably be something that would almost certainly show up. But I also want to do some stuff that's a little bit more out there, so these next couple items will be centered around Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. The last two pieces of clothing would be hats based on two of the starters from Scarlet and Violet. The first one would be a replica of the hat that Quaxley wears. I'm sure that Nintendo could find some way to make it clear and look like it's water on your head. I couldn't figure it out, so I didn't even bother trying. I wasn't too sure what to do with Fuecoco, but I realized the white part of its head looks pretty similar to a baseball cap, so I just went ahead with that idea. My favorite part of this hat is the little tooth that pops out of the front. I think it's so funny. Of course, I couldn't forget about the final starter of the bunch, which is Sprigatito. For Sprigatito, I went with an end table that's shaped like its face with similar markings on it to make it distinct. This was very heavily inspired by the Eevee table from the Pocket Camp crossover. Obviously, this item is pretty rough in my game, but if it was actually done right, I'm sure it could look really cool. This next item isn't really a piece of furniture, but I'm not too sure how to categorize it, so I'll just add it to this category. In New Horizons, you have the ability to change your phone case on your Nook phone, but it's very underutilized because your hand is usually covering it up. I decided that an Arc phone case would be something pretty cool to have as an item because it's a good reference to Legends Arceus, plus it's something that actually makes your Nook phone look unique. And for our final piece of furniture, I went with a chair that looks like an open Pokeball. Maybe it could be customizable so that you could change the colors to look like a Master Ball or a Great Ball or something like that. Our choice for a villager seems like it's pretty much endless with how many Pokemon there are, and I didn't want to go with any of the starters because if one was put in, then that would mean that the other two would need to be put in as well. Even though I don't think it would be very likely, I went with Lechonk from Scarlet and Violet. Not only would this be a great way to promote the latest game, at least at the moment, but Lechonk took the internet by storm when they were shown off in one of the teasers for Scarlet and Violet. Nintendo obviously would want to trail off that success, and I think Lechonk's dopey look would just make for a great lazy villager. There's so many more items that could be added based on Pokemon that it could probably be its own video, but for the sake of time, let's move into our next franchise. The Legend of Zelda has had a crossover in every single main Animal Crossing game except for New Horizons. Some games have had more items than others, but the point is that it feels a little wrong to not have any Zelda items in New Horizons. Technically, there is an ocarina in the game, but this seems like the actual instrument as opposed to being a reference to the item from Zelda. I'm going to do my best to avoid copying any items that have already been in previous Animal Crossing games, and the easiest way to do that is by focusing on Breath of the Wild. My first idea is a t-shirt based around the Sheikah eye symbol that's really prominent in Breath of the Wild. The colors of blue and orange are a reference to the shrine colors before and after they're beaten, and the blue shows up pretty often in promotional materials for Breath of the Wild. Next up, I think it would be a cool idea to have a backpack item in the shape of the Hylian shield. Link often wears this shield on his back, and the Hylian shield is one of the most well-known items from the series, so I think this would be a great piece of clothing to have that could go with a custom-designed Link costume. For furniture, something I think a lot of people want to see get more love is the Majora's Mask game. I went with 4 wall-mounted items that are meant to represent the 4 champions from Breath of the Wild. The Goron mask for Daruk, the Zora mask for Mipha, the Bremen mask for Revali, and since there aren't really any Gerudo masks in Majora's Mask, Urbosa will have to be represented by the Giant's mask because of how tall they are. I know it would be expected to have wearable masks, but honestly, I feel like some of these masks just wouldn't fit the face of your villager correctly, so I went with a wall-mounted instead. This next item is probably my favorite, and it's a Korok Gyroid. Koroks and gyroids share a lot of similarities in the sense that they're little creatures that like to dance, so I think this would be a really great addition to the gyroid sets. Bonus points if the gyroids were customizable to represent the different leaf masks that the Koroks wear. Finally, we have an umbrella based on the paraglider from Breath of the Wild. The glider is a huge part of that game, so some type of reference to it is necessary, and instead of just having it be an item, I figured it could go with this slightly more functional and subtle reference. In terms of our villager, most of the obvious ideas have already been done, like Wolf Link or Epona, but luckily Breath of the Wild has a character that would work perfectly. Cass is a minor character in the game, but he's pretty recognizable and has a really nice design. Originally I was going to do Revali since he's more recognizable, but I thought it would be weird to have only one divine champion represented by a villager. Cass just makes more sense to represent the game overall. Another option would be a horse based on the giant horse, but I think this would be a bit too obscure of a reference to really work as a villager. But I think the coloring and the design is really cool, so I wouldn't mind seeing this come over. Zelda is probably the most represented crossover in the Animal Crossing series, but I feel like these items would make really unique entries into a crossover for New Horizons. And finally, we have our last series that could cross over with New Horizons with Splatoon. Splatoon 3 released near the very end of Nintendo's support of New Horizons, so a lot of people were hoping that there would be some kind of crossover to promote the game. Obviously that never happened, so let's see what could have been done. I think the villagers are pretty obvious, and that's to have Shiver and Fry represented by squirrel villagers. This is a callback to Cece and Viche from New Leaf, where they were supposed to be villagers that were cosplaying as the idols from Splatoon 2. It would make a ton of sense to keep that tradition going with the next generation of both of these games by representing the new idols. And I know that there are 3 idols this time, but there's not really any way to make Big Man a villager, so as much as we would love to see it, I don't think it's gonna happen. We do need some kind of Big Man representation though, so let's move into our furniture pieces. There are some minor spoilers for the Splatoon 3 story mode, so if you want to avoid that, I would say skip this part. Our first piece of furniture is going to be a rug that's based off the Big Man fight in Splatoon 3's story mode. In that fight, Big Man breaks himself up into different blue manta rays that swim on the ground, but for the purpose of this rug, I think the color should be based on the ink that he leaves behind since it's a little bit more interesting. Next up is a Tacticooler that I think would work really well if it could have the same animations that are in the game. It would be really cool to have the cans pop out when your character walks by or interacts with the item or something like that. Another idea that I had for the Tacticooler was that it could act as a way to change clothes, because I figured, why not? If you can change your clothes in an ice chest, then I figured, why not the Tacticooler? And finally, for furniture, we could have different weapons from the game as wall-mountable items. I'm not really sure how many items Nintendo would realistically add, but at the very least, I think that there should be the splatter shot since it's the main weapon shown in artwork and merchandise. And finally, we have clothing. Splatoon has a huge variety of clothes, so it'll be tough to choose just one to port over to New Horizons. I think our best choice would be the Tri-Shred tee since it's what your character starts off with and it's the shirt that's featured on the box art. But if they didn't want to do that, they could always just port over the shirts from whatever Splatfest would be happening at the time of the crossover. And lastly, our final piece of clothing is another backpack, this time in the form of an ink tank. It would be really great to be able to customize the color of the ink inside the tank, and I'd love to see the little light on top of the tank light up when it gets dark outside. Overall, I think Splatoon would be a great franchise to cross over with Animal Crossing with how much it focuses on different clothing and items. And that's going to do it for some potential ideas of every major franchise crossing over with New Horizons. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving a like because it took a very long time to add all of these items to my game. Obviously, there are so many more franchises that could be done, so if there's anything that I missed, let me know and there may end up being a part 2. Oh, also, I now have memberships on my channel. If you don't know, memberships are a way to support the creator and you get some extra perks like a badge next to your name, you can see videos early, and even some exclusive videos. If you want to get early access to videos or some exclusive content, or if you just want to support me, then you can hit the join button and become a superb member. Yeah, that's what I'm calling that. Obviously no pressure to do it, it's just a little bit extra for you and a little bit extra for me. But with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.